Have you ever walked past an old house and felt a sudden chill crawl down your spine? Maybe you've heard strange sounds or seen shadows in the window, but couldn't quite explain them. Imagine living in a house where every creak of the floor, every gust of wind makes your heart race with fear. On Maple Street, there's a house with a history that seems to whisper its tragic past to anyone who dares to listen. Locals in a small town near Chicago have long whispered about the haunted house on Maple Street, a place so darkened by mystery and tragedy that it's been abandoned for decades. But what made this house so terrifying? The answers may be buried within the walls, if you dare to listen. The story begins long ago, in the early 1900s, when the house on Maple Street was first built. It was a grand structure, standing proudly as the most beautiful house on the block. For years, the Sullivan family lived there, a typical family by all accounts. A hard-working father, a loving mother, and two young children. But behind the bright windows, something darker was brewing. In 1923, tragedy struck. One night, a violent storm rolled in, rattling the windows and howling through the trees. Neighbors heard frantic cries for help coming from the house but dismissed them as just the storm. The next morning, the Sullivan family was found dead. They were all brutally murdered in their own home, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. The case baffled local authorities, and despite their best efforts, the killer was never found. After the murders, things began to change. The house stood empty for years, but every time someone moved in, they didn't last long. They all reported hearing strange sounds at night, footsteps when no one was there, whispers when the house was completely empty. The most terrifying reports came from a family that moved in during the 1950s. This family, the Harrisons, moved in, hopeful for a fresh start. But within weeks, they too began hearing odd noises. It wasn't just at night either. In broad daylight, they'd hear footsteps pacing up and down the staircase, even when no one was home. Doors that had been locked tight would be found open. The strangest part? The whispers, a woman's voice calling out softly in the hallway, saying, "Help me." As the days went on, things only escalated. The youngest daughter, Sarah, claimed to see a woman standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at her with hollow, lifeless eyes. When Sarah tried to speak to her, the woman vanished into thin air. The woman in the mirror became the most unsettling part of the legend. According to reports, the ghost of the murdered mother, Margaret Sullivan, now roamed the house, trapped in a restless state. The family had originally hung a large mirror in the hallway, but after the murder, it was found shattered on the floor. Local law says that Margaret's spirit, in its anger and grief, became trapped within that very mirror. Those who had the misfortune of staring into the cracked mirror reported seeing Margaret's reflection, but not in the way one would expect. Instead of her smiling, warm face, a twisted, anguished expression appeared, a reflection that seemed to move and speak, whispering her sorrow and rage to those who dared look. Despite several attempts to clear the house of its hauntings, nothing seemed to work. Paranormal investigators who spent nights in the house reported feeling watched, hearing the faint sound of a woman crying, and feeling an oppressive, heavy air around them. One investigator even claimed to have been physically pushed by an unseen force. The most chilling account came from a medium who visited the house in the late 1970s. She claimed that Margaret Sullivan's spirit was not only angry, but trapped in a cycle of grief, unable to move on. She couldn't accept what happened to her family, and her spirit was forever bound to the house. Today, the house on Maple Street still stands, silent and forgotten by many, but its dark history lives on. No one dares to go near it. The walls still whisper, the windows still flicker with a pale light in the dead of night. The local children dare each other to run past the house, but none of them ever stop to look inside. They know what happened there, and they know better than to tempt fate. It's a place where time seems to stand still, where a mother's grief and rage keep the house alive and forever haunted. Some stories are too dark to be left behind, and some houses are better left forgotten.